I'm Srinivasan, one of the co-founders and CEO of Spoke, and we're really excited about talking about how to scale yourself and your team as you move from being an IT hire to an IT leader. As you can tell, we're using Zoom for our webinar here, and as we figure out how to use it, one of the things that we know for sure is that if you have questions, please add them to the Zoom room. And our team here, we're collecting all the questions, and we'll make sure to have some time at the end to go through them. So jumping right back into things, Spoke is a simple, easy to use ticketing system and knowledge base that learns the answers to common questions and then automatically handles them for you. When it doesn't know the answer, triages requests and sends them to the right place. Clearly, Spoke needs to use Spoke, and we'll get to that later. But let's actually jump into why we're here. When we started Spoke, we not only wanted to build a simple, delightful system for people to use to make their sort of day-to-day IT jobs easier, but we also truly deeply care about the IT managers that use us. We want to figure out how to help them do their job better, not just through the tools that they use, but how they interact with their colleagues. This is the second webinar that we've done. The first we did was with Jeff Strauss at Tinder, where we had a long conversation about the role of IT in an organization. And sort of on that theme, we are super excited to have Dana Campbell from Slack with us today. By day, Dana works as the IT operations and platform manager at Slack, where she helps innovate and craft a best-in-class IT experience. And one of the reasons we were so excited about having Dana on is it's not just that she's a great IT leader, she cares deeply about the community. She co-founded MacBrained, an IT think tank, communities for IT leaders, developers, and engineers, and she's super active in that community. And so I'm going to hand it over to Dana to quickly introduce herself, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how she came about to be in her role, how she thinks about it, and most importantly, how do you scale quickly? So Dana, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Jay. That was an awesome intro. So a little bit about me. I currently work at Slack. I lead both the IT operations and platform teams, which I'm sure we'll dig into in a little bit. And I'm just super excited to be here and share a little bit about me.
Well, thank you so much. And so let's actually start with a little bit about what it feels like, honestly, to be an IT manager at a company like Slack that's growing so quickly. So let's start with the basics. What motivated you to get into IT?
Good question. Ever since I was young, I always loved taking apart things and putting them back together. I actually started off in high school. I worked for CompUSA. I don't know if you old timers know what that is.
I believe I've heard of them.
Okay. So started off in retail, CompUSA, ended out in having the opportunity to open up a store on Chestnut Street at Apple, which was super cool. You don't really get the opportunity to join Apple and open up a store. So that was just a great experience. Kind of learned, customer service, learned bedside manner, and really my love for Apple kind of started there.
How did it compare going from like CompUSA to Apple in terms of the sort of customer experience aspect of it?
Yeah, night and day. CompUSA was all about sell, and Apple was all about the customer experience, getting that right. Did they care if you sold Apple Care? Absolutely. But it wasn't the driving factor. They wanted to make sure that we took care of everyone.
Nice.
Yeah, and so from there, from Apple, kind of started my first my gig in the corporate world at an ad agency, managing Macs, which was super fun. That's when I actually first learned about Casper, which is a Mac management tool. And that's where I actually first met my co-founders of MacBrained. It was at a Mac Tech, Macworld conference, and we all met. We were chatting, and we all had the same problems. We're all trying to solve everyday Apple issues. Managing Macs is kind of unique when it comes to managing other platforms like Windows and whatnot. And that's where we started MacBrained. And then from there, kind of knew I had a couple gigs in kind of the more enterprise world, and then figured that I really wanted to work for a startup. I had a lot of friends that kind of left Apple, went to Square and Uber and whatnot. And that's when I joined Lookout Mobile Security. I was there for about 3 years, ended out being the IT manager, and then now I'm at Slack.
That's awesome. I mean, was it so obviously from your side, it was a fantastic career decision to essentially focus on Macs. Was that a conscious choice at some point, or was it just by chance that you went to Apple and then you migrated to that?
Yeah, I mean, I just always had a love for the platform and for the product. I was definitely kind of a fangirl. I remember I bought my first Mac at CompUSA and paid a fortune for it, but saved up my money, and of course, don't really get much of a discount. But I love the intersection of technology and design, and that's just Apple, giving me an Apple.
Yeah, absolutely. I still remember saving up for my first Mac. It was a big deal. So let's talk about your time at Slack. So let's start with the basics. What is your day-to-day like?
Yeah, so majority of it is meetings, but those meetings are mostly around syncing with my teams. So right now I'm managing about 10 people across 2 teams, and a lot of it's just problem solving. My job is to clear obstacles, for my team and make sure that they can be productive and do the best work they can.
Absolutely. And so let's at this point, obviously Slack's a lot bigger, but can you talk about what the IT team looks like right now at Slack and how it evolved over your time there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was the third IT hire, and at the time there was just a leadership and support, and I kind of came in and was kind of a utility player. I did a bit of leadership. I did a bit of just getting my hands dirty. I actually started as a consultant for Slack prior to joining, and I back when we had our 155 Fifth Street headquarters, and implemented the Zoom, and actually installed Zoom rooms, which was kind of fun. It was kind of sad to leave there, knowing that I'm actually the person that drill a hole in the table.
Yeah.
So back then, it was really getting your hands dirty and just doing everything. To now, we're about 50 plus people in in an organization. The IT org has expanded from just what we call ourselves now, which is core IT, which is kind of traditional IT. You have your support, ops and platform kind of pillars, to different business functions. So we have a go-to-market team that's focused on marketing, legal, and sales. And the director of that team kind of sits alongside the leadership in those departments. And so instead of having folks come to us and say, we need Salesforce, we'd be part of that conversation and really trying to figure out, what problem are we trying to solve? And maybe there's a different solution, or maybe this solution will integrate better with the tools that we already have. And that's helped tremendously. We also have kind of our corporate systems on the finance and people ops side, as well as a newer addition, which is our communications team. So that's kind of comms and training. So they help us write documentation and kind of do our communication plans, which is super helpful, as well as data and analytics and application development, which is kind of leading our Slack on Slack initiative.
Makes sense.
So huge team.
Yeah, no. So first of all, I'm going to put a pin in the communications role, because when you were telling me about that before the webinar, I was super fascinated by it. At this stage, I guess just one other question about the team structure. So how does Slack build a lot of stuff internally, or are you still primarily taking an approach of finding best of breed tools and bringing them in and integrating them?
And I think it's a combination of both. You kind of go through these waves of, you're kind of, at first you're the scrappy startup, and you don't have the resources to necessarily build. And so you're making investments and you're buying a lot. And then you're kind of shifting to kind of having those resources and having the opportunity to build. And so I think it kind of just goes back and forth. I think we're currently, it really depends on the problem that we're trying to solve. There's some things that, we'll either buy and then kind of build off of it. I think that's kind of the current model for a couple of things. I just hired my first software developer in IT, which I was super excited about.
Yeah.
There's been all these kind of internal tools and projects that we've been wanting to do for a long time, but just never had the resources, or would have to bug our engineering internal tools team that has enough going on. And so we're definitely building more.
That's awesome. And I think with the API-ification of everything, you can start having all these tools talk to each other much more effectively. Before we get to the scaling section of our conversation, one of the things you alluded to was, as companies grow, sort of, you have more resources and therefore you can start doing different things. And so how do you think about the different phases of IT as a company grows? Like, what happens when you're like less than 50 people, 50 to 200, et cetera? How would you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that I kind of look at it is, when you're starting off kind of, 1 to, let's say, 200, you're really focused on support, because you don't really have the foundation that will basically kind of help, manage itself. And so building that, that customer service focused support team is really important in getting that right, and making sure that you kind of come up with some sort of number or framework around when to hire next, especially when you're growing globally. Then from, say, 200 to 500, you kind of shift that to the kind of operations side of things. And that's, making sure that you do have that foundation, networking and infrastructure to kind of AV. That's kind of around the time that you're going to start building out offices. That's typically what happens. And once you build one, you kind of build 10. I think around that time, we did probably about 4 or 5 within, or I think I did at one point 6 in 6 months. Wow. Which was insane. And so having that foundation is super important. And then when you get to about 500 to 1,000, you start, you start collecting a lot of technical debt. And a lot of that is around process and standards, and trying to do that early is going to save in the long run, for sure. And that's something that we're currently doing. We have standards when it comes to kind of our global development for builds. We have standards for things like imaging. It's just kind of becoming the theme of this year. And I think it's super important.
Awesome. Any tips on how to communicate, given how large, like 50 plus people in the IT team, any communication tips?
Well, there's this little thing called Slack.
Yeah.
No, but we are such power users of Slack, and just the integrations that live on our platform. So we use things like Stand-Up-Ly. We do have one remote employee on my team who works in Melbourne. So he's literally across the world. And so we used to do a morning and an afternoon kind of, what do you plan on working on today? Yeah. And like, what do you want to share with the team? And we've been able to kind of build out certain project channels to kind of alleviate a lot of, bugging someone in the morning to say, what are you working on when, they're just wrapping their head around what needs to happen for the day. And so we do have a lot of structured channels. Some of them are actually just for announcements, and some are for triage and troubleshooting. And I think that when you're a power user of Slack, I think it is important to have that structure. And doing things like having, prefixes. For us at Slack, we have, announcements -global, announcements -SF, right. Announcements -IT is actually a brand new one. And those are default for everyone. So we try to kind of do the same thing within IT. I guess I think I've been going around and kind of sharing that with everyone, because I think it makes a huge impact in just how you use the product.
Oh, absolutely. So let's shift gears a little and actually now talk about your advice to folks based on the sort of rapid scaling that Slack has gone through, how that should guide IT managers as they think about their roles. And so let's start with probably one of the most important questions in my mind, which is the perception of IT within an organization, especially as it scales so quickly. Sort of the standard point here is always the only time you talk to IT is when something's not working. Any advice, how do you think about shaping and molding the perception of IT in an organization, especially as it's scaling?
Yeah, so something that we're doing right now is kind of going through this branding process, which I never thought that an IT, I've never seen an IT.
Let that be a key takeaway. IT needs to brand itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Even talking about what we call kind of our sub team, we call it core IT kind of internally, but trying to come up with a kind of different name, more catchy name. But I think branding us as more than, just keeping the lights on. I think that's a phrase that a lot of people use, is traditional IT. All they do is make sure, Wi-Fi works and, AV, and that's about it. We shouldn't include them in, planning our conferences or, building offices or whatnot. And so what I've done and what, so I think the leadership, IT leadership as a whole has done is kind of built up, kind of IT stakeholders and kind of gone across the business and organization and kind of identify, kind of our cheerleaders, as well as, people that have seen some challenges or have, pointed out areas in which we can improve. And we meet with them on a quarterly basis and kind of go over, their roadmap and kind of share ours and see where we can align. And in most cases, that's where we find out that, marketing wants to start doing webinars more often. We need to, build a program that can help support that.
Right. So So having these quarterly meetings with key stakeholders across different functions of the company, understanding what they need and making sure that your roadmap is aligned to them. Do you ever find the situation where you need to sell the value of IT, or are these meetings sufficient?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes I think that you have to do a little bit of digging and just know what types of questions to ask and kind of thinking outside of the box. Trying to think of a solid example, but even when it comes to supporting workplace, for example, and for them, they're kind of heads down and kind of focused on customer service, and they kind of have their own ticketing system, but for them, they're doing everything kind of through Slack and trying to figure out, you should actually be a part of ours, and we can actually help implement that super quickly. I mean, they just had no idea.
Right.
They thought that they were kind of on their own for that one.
So more often than not, it's they had no idea you could help, not that they're resistant to it.
Absolutely.
Any tips on, for example, if someone listening today gets motivated and goes and has a conversation with their HR leader or their marketing leader, any tips on how to start that initial conversation to convey that, look, we're here to help?
Yeah, I think it's as easy as, kind of sharing what you have going on. And usually that can, spark a conversation around something that is on their roadmap or something that's on their mind. I think it's usually pretty organic.
And sort of, so that's going and sort of soliciting inputs on what other teams need.
Mm-hmm.
What about the inverse? How do you think about communicating what IT is doing, the wins, to the entire organization?
Yeah, that's actually been a challenge of ours for a while. Once in a while, I know that our leadership teams will talk to either our CEO or our CFO and say, we want to recognize, building 6 offices in 6 months. And, usually we'll get some sort of, direct recognition. But since we've implemented this communications team, we've actually started this channel. I think I mentioned it earlier, Announcements IT, which was, I think, a huge win for us because it's a default channel. everyone's a part of it. I guess you could leave. No one can say anything in it because it's announcements only. But we share. I think we're doing it weekly now. Kind of weekly wins or tips and tricks, and it's been super effective. And I've been kind of going around telling everyone, we should start announcements IT.
Yeah.
Because some things, I mean, it sounds simple, but I think it takes a little bit of buy-in to recognize that, that IT is important enough as a business partner to warrant its own announcements channel.
Yeah. I mean, just the phrase announcements versus only receiving input, I think, is the key here.
Yeah, and you're sharing wins, but you're also sharing when the Wi-Fi is down.
Yeah.
Or when something might not be working. And I think that we, along the lines of how Slack communicates, is we just communicate everything. Even if there's if we're running a risk of an office, losing Wi-Fi, we're gonna post it before it goes out.
Yeah, awesome. What is again, thinking about just how Slack's IT team has grown? What is something that you wish you knew when you were a 3-person team that has? Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, good question. Definitely had a challenge around hiring. I think that we are very lucky and had kind of the executive backing to kind of hire, frequent and early. We kind of got to a stage where I think that we kind of wanted to prove that we can be scrappy, but that definitely wasn't the right way to go. You never really predict, attrition. Had a couple people leave, already needed to hire more people, and now you're in this hole, and it's kind of hard to get out. And that definitely, we definitely went through that, and it took about a year to recover. So I wish I would have hired people a lot sooner. If we know you need someone within 6 months, well, sometimes it takes 6 months to hire. And there's a lot of key roles, especially around kind of the operations side of the house. It took me 6 months to hire a client platform engineer. There's just not a lot out there. Facebook and Uber and Square are all taking them up. And so, I just would have never, I knew it was going to be difficult. I didn't know it was going to be that difficult.
Right.
And so, posting those early and kind of, showing that if you can, get stats around, how long it takes to hire a particular role, I think that's helpful.
Got it. So we're gonna dig in a lot more into hiring for a growing team, but before we get off the stating of the value of IT, that topic, we've talked about communicating with all of your colleagues in different functions, the announcements channel. On top of that, you have obviously all of the stuff that's coming in. How do you keep on top of your tasks and projects?
Yeah, so we actually just started using Smart Sheets kind of as a project management tool. So one of the teams that I lead is called Platform, and that's mostly focused on the technical project management and the global development project management. We started using Smart Sheets to kind of track all of our projects, both from kind of the operations roadmap and the global development roadmap, because although they're similar in the workflow, there's a little bit different about what we're trying to track. And it's been an awesome tool. We've been working with their platform team to work on the Slack integration, and so have definitely given them kind of input. And they've actually implemented features for us. And other than that, I use Slack. I use the Remind Me feature probably more than anyone I know. And that's helpful. I also definitely micromanage my calendar, block out time for particular tasks. I think is really helpful for me.
Yeah.
Even yesterday, I blocked out my entire day to just focus on one thing that's been on my backlog for a while, and just kind of focus. But yeah, I mean, I definitely take a look at my calendar and kind of value my time. And I definitely have like kind of an open door policy when it comes to, we have one-on-one scheduled every week, but if someone needs extra time, I'm always going to make time. That's the priority.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks. So let's move on to the next topic, which is hiring in a little bit more detail. So let's start with brass tacks. How do you budget for this? How do you, you said you'd wish you'd hired some roles quicker, or at least started the process earlier, but how do you even budget for this? And I'd say this is actually one of the more important topics for a lot of the IT managers on the line. They know the amount of work that they're doing. We talked about, okay, look, you want to state the value of IT to other folks in your company. You want to talk to your stakeholders. You want to communicate your roadmap. But at the end of the day, you need budget to actually bring on folks. So how do you start there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, budgeting is hard. It never gets slightly easier with certain tools, but it's something that I loathe, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. But it gets a little bit easier once you've done it once for a company. You kind of have that baseline, and it's super important to know your list of, especially on the software side. I mean, software, we have ridiculous amount of just SaaS services.
Yeah.
And we started using a tool called Silo to kind of help not only kind of list them all out, but also see how do we pay for it, when do we pay for it, how much do we pay for it, who uses it, what is the usage, and that has helped tremendously. And so we actually just started we just kicked off our budgeting cycle using Xylo, and it's just been night and day. So now you have this spreadsheet that kind of, for the most part, fills out itself, and then you have to go look at the roadmap. I think that our finance team has really pushed hard to challenge us to kind of be as accurate as we can. They say we know that you're putting in a little bit of buffer, but don't. And if you need to go back to the well, it's okay.
Yeah.
Building that relationship with finance has definitely paid off in dividends, for sure. I'm happy to have them on speed dial.
Yeah. Or Slack, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's budgeting. Now let's talk about, again, one of the hard, even as the CEO of a startup, one of the hardest things that you go through is actually maintaining culture as you grow. And I'm sure that applies to sub-teams as well. So you grow from 3 to 55 folks. What is the culture like right now, and how do you think about that in the IT team?
Yeah, so within the IT team, we actually just put together kind of our core values. We just did this exercise, and it kind of took us a while to kind of distill those down. And I, probably should have them memorized, but I'll kind of read a couple of them off and cheat a little bit. So the first one is users first, and that kind of goes back to that kind of customer service mentality, and kind of always doing the right thing. The next one is push the envelope. Be creative, be innovative. And then we have attack the problem, not the person, which is one of my personal favorites.
Yes.
We're going to break things, and that's no one's fault. So let's fix it as a team and make sure it doesn't happen again. And then we have respectful candor. Be direct with your feedback, but be respectful as well. And then take pride. Let's show off our wins. I think IT can be very, very humble, and not really look for recognition. But I think it's time that we kind of change that and really show off what we do and how we can provide value.
I love this, right? Like Dana's literally telling the folks about how the IT team at Slack has their own core values. Obviously, I'm sure they're aligned with the core values of Slack as a whole, but that is a fascinating concept to me. which again takes you from just being this break fix. You only go to someone when there's a problem to actually being an organization that communicates with the rest of the company. And if you look at the cultural values that you flagged, users first, pushing the envelope, attacking the problem, etc. Those could be the values of a startup. Those could be the values of a company, not just a team within a company, which sort of talks about the all-encompassing nature of this. It's awesome.
Yeah, and they definitely align to our company values as well.
Yeah, that is awesome. So when someone joins Slack's IT team now, or for that matter, when they join an IT team anywhere, any tips on how they should stand out? How do they hit the ground running?
Yeah, I mean, I always tell my new hires that, the first 30 days, just observe. There's going to be so much to take in. We have an amazing, people ops team that provide just great orientation, both for to get you familiar with the company, but also to get you familiar with, your department. Engineering has absolutely amazing orientation, and so it can be a little overwhelming. So I think as much as people want to kind of hit the ground running, I encourage them not to, and sit in on a couple of meetings, and ask a ton of questions, and once they'll know when they're ready, or I definitely can tell when someone's ready, and kind of take it from there. And to definitely give us a lot of feedback on how we can improve things. We've kind of gotten our best tips through feedback.
And as you have new hires and existing folks, like as a manager, as an IT, not an IT manager, but a people manager, what are some things that you do to make sure your team is doing the best it can?
Yeah. For new hires, definitely try to do kind of call it 30, 60, 90 day plan. And usually, like I said, the first 3 days is kind of blocked out, observe. And then kind of having kind of these key wins. And usually, that can come from the roadmap. Either someone's coming in for a specific project, or that's kind of, learning a specific workflow or whatnot. But definitely defining, after 90 days, this is what, I think that you should be able to achieve and what you want to achieve, and kind of checking that off and getting your first win, I think is super motivating.
30 days observing, 60 days start getting your hands dirty, 90 days get a key win.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Just sort of last tactical question on hiring, and especially for folks that are looking to change their careers, et cetera. Any tips on key skills that an IT professional of this day and age should know?
Yeah, so I think that there's two in particular. I think that learning a language is definitely important, because you learn so many different skills. You learn how to learn, which I think is important, and how to challenge yourself. It's something that I did a while back. And I think kind of, technical writing and, kind of communication in general, I think is something that gets overlooked. And being able to kind of, articulate kind of a project summary or write, documentation is definitely a skill that needs to be developed.
Absolutely. So let's shift tacks to start talking about making technology investments. And we talked a little bit about framing investments to key stakeholders, getting buy-in, et cetera. And we also talked a little bit about building internally versus buying. But once, obviously, there's announcements channel to communicate the wins of the team. How do you take it upon yourselves to communicate the wins of IT investments? So, for example, let's say you guys go and buy an expensive tool. Is that communicating how that tool is doing? Is that part of your responsibility?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes those are kind of transparent. So we'll implement a kind of integration that's public, and someone just might not know what's under the hood, and we might highlight that. In our biz ops channel, we kind of communicate kind of key revenue stats And one day that suddenly changed and it looked a little different. And so we announced what was under the hood and what was driving that. And folks would have no idea unless we told them.
Right. And so that's it's fascinating. When Spoke at the end of the day is a ticketing system, but it's integrated with a bunch of different tools. And one of my favorite experiences is usually when someone moves from just using an email-based ticketing system to something like Spoke, because they realize that they're not handling 200 tickets a month, they're actually handling 800 because of all these people pinging them on Slack and walking by their desk, etc.
Yeah,
so
that's actually a stat that it's difficult to get with traditional help desk tools.
Yeah, and so in that situation, you got to enable them, but then you also have to communicate that outwards because no one knows you're handling 800 requests a month.
Yeah.
What do you do when a tool doesn't work out? You spend a lot of money, you bought a tool.
Yeah, happens often, more often than you would think. Something that I always say is, fail fast and kind of know when to shift. So for every deployment plan that we do, we always have a backup plan. And, part of that backup plan is, what if this doesn't work out? What's that plan B? I think that I've kind of putting that as part of your deployment plan is super helpful, and just knowing when to make that call and making that call kind of early, and giving your team the confidence to be able to say this didn't work out.
Right.
Sometimes the active failing can be looked as frowned upon or discouraged. But I think that when you encourage it, that it's becomes normalized. Sometimes it's a product that has said that they're going to implement features, and it never worked out, and that's definitely happened with us before a couple of times.
Got it. So I want to leave some time at the end for Q&A, but I also think it's super important to talk about relationships and building them as you scale. So let's spend a little bit of time on that. Start with sort of at the department level. Who are the folks that you expect to be your champions, you expect to have a good relationship with, and who are the folks that were kind of unexpected?
Yeah, so we have a close relationship with engineering. I think that's expected. We make sure that they have the hardware that they need, the software, and the support, as well as workplace. Mentioned earlier, we partner with them on the global development side of things, as well as onboarding. And as far as kind of unexpected, security, sometimes IT and security can kind of have a love-hate relationship.
Right.
Because usually they're telling us, you have to implement this, or you shouldn't be using this product. But we actually have a great relationship with security, and we collaborate and kind of come up with kind of our compliance standards together. And they've been absolutely amazing. Best security team I've ever worked with, as well as finance. I was talking earlier, finance is your best friend. Kind of pushing back when it comes to budget is not the way to go. Don't bite the hand that feeds you.
Right.
And showing them that underlying story around, why you're making these investments. Sometimes you're just going to go to finance and say, I want $1 million. But if you think that they might not care about the story behind it, or understand, but I think painting that story is super helpful. And then you build that relationship, and the next time around that you go and ask for money, they're going to remember that.
Yeah, they'll trust you to essentially have the backing and that makes sense. How do you think about as you're building? So one part of it is obviously building relationships with key stakeholders within your company. What is your approach, and how do you think about mentorship in the IT realm?
Yeah, I mean, mentorship and career development have always kind of been near and dear to me. It's something that I try to promote, not only within my team, but externally as well, with the communities that I've helped support. Within my team, we've built kind of career paths, as well as kind of office hours. Some people just don't know what they want to do until you kind of show them what the options are and what's out there. And, it's a goal of mine to build kind of specific tracks for folks. Kind of mentioned the sub-teams within operations. We have networking, infrastructure, software development, client platform engineering, applications and identity. There's just so many different areas. And, showcasing what each of them do, be it kind of a recent project or kind of what's under the hood, is really helpful for someone out there that just has no idea.
Right.
And then, kind of externally, kind of, promoting community and bringing people together, and kind of sharing. I think that one of the biggest questions that I hear is, should I continue being an IC or should I be a manager? And kind of what's the difference and what are the trade-offs there? I do think that you don't have to excel in IT. You don't always have to go the management route. I think there's amazing kind of senior ICs out there and architects and whatnot, and people that I highly respect, and you kind of go down that technical route.
Yeah, do you think it's a common perception right now that the only way to grow in IT is to become a people manager?
I do. And I think building out those career paths to show those different routes that you can take is just really helpful.
Sort of last question on relationships, and then we should move to the Q&A. How do you think about? Do you encourage sort of cross IT team movement in your team? Is there, like, at 55, I'm assuming at north of 50 people, I'm sure there are other opportunities that people can do. So do people just tend to come and get really good at their craft at doing one thing at Slack, or is there a movement?
I think there's starting to become some movement. I think that we're kind of big enough that especially people within support are kind of looking at the different areas of IT, and there's only so far that you can go down these support paths, and that's becoming a little bit more common to see people come up to me and say, "Hey, tell me a little about project management."
Right.
That sounds pretty awesome, or I really want to learn more about networking. So it's definitely starting to become more common.
Very cool. So with that, let's actually move on to the Q&A section. We've got a bunch of different questions, but I'd say before we started the webinar, we had asked Dana for like sort of one piece of advice, and your take was basically build a solid foundation with exceptional customer service at your core. This enables you to shift from keeping the lights on to becoming a valued business partner. So at the end of the day, get the fundamentals right. Make sure you're obviously delivering on what you need to do, but start building those relationships, start planning ahead, and have core values that you strive for. Any other like sort of parting thoughts on the scaling section before we get to the Q&A?
Yeah, I think that the one thing that I probably left out of that is around the process and standards. I think that when you're a scrappy startup, you kind of process is the last thing that you want to hear. And that just screams red tape, but it's going to become your friend in the long run, and kind of figuring out timing wise what makes sense for you to kind of start implementing some sort of process around project management, or how you strategize your deployments, different types of standards around global development. Is just it's going to pay off.
Makes sense. Thank you. So we have some questions that have come in. So let's move to that. The first one: how should IT teams go? It's quite specific. How should IT teams go about audits? Why are they important? What do you do?
Yeah, audits. Audits are fun. We definitely have had our fair share, and the amount of effort has definitely decreased actually a little bit as we've kind of prepared and built out kind of compliance standards. So we have an amazing risk and compliance team as well as security team, and they kind of help prep us um, uh, around, different SOC and ISO standards. And we got to a point now where everything's pretty much good to go for our regular audits. And I could do a whole section on
audits.
on audits, but build partnerships with the resources that you have, if you have any resources. I'm sure that there are plenty of external ones if you don't have them internally. And then put together your compliance standards and stick to them and come up with a process on how to report them on a regular cadence.
Very cool. The next question, when you start a team that does admin, development, training, and service desk as a single role, how do you decide when to start splitting it up into multiple people doing specialized things?
Within support.
Yeah,
so for us, we kind of had generalized support for a while. I don't think that we started doing AV support and executive support until we were around, I'd say, 500 employees or so. And once we had that AV support, everyone was ecstatic because kind of shifting between both. I actually prided ourselves on having a support team that would be able to do that. But you get to a point where you're large enough that dropping something to go remote into a Mac Mini or dropping everything to run to a conference room is just not scalable.
Right. Got it. And so, as you start hiring, what are some of the qualities that you look for in the people that you hire?
Yeah. So on the support side, but I would say across all areas of IT, it's definitely looking for motivation as well as kind of that customer service, kind of soft skills in general. How does this person communicate? Can they communicate effectively across different areas of the organization? Well, can they talk to our CEO the same that they're going to talk to an engineer? Are they comfortable? And that's mostly on the support side of things. And then when it comes to kind of operations and engineering, other than just the basic technical aptitude, it's kind of having that experience in scaling. Because sometimes, especially for me, I definitely have not been with a startup growing, corporation with this many employees, this many offices. I definitely don't have all the answers, and so hiring people that have that experience that can help me is important. And I think some people, don't realize that.
Yeah. And actually, another question that came in, which I think ties in well to this, do you think it's better to specialize roles or have a broader mix of common skills? And let me add to that question, does that change as the size of your company changes?
Yeah, it absolutely changes. In the beginning, say 0 to 500 or so, you need utility players. You need people that are willing to basically do everything because that's just how it's going to be. When you kind of hit, 500 to 1,000, and you start kind of growing out your kind of operations team, and even within support as well, you'll kind of get more specialized. Throw in that AV support, executive support, instead of having someone that's kind of just a systems engineer, kind of focused on identity or applications, networking, etc.
Got it. So what are some challenges that you've encountered in your role? I'm sure there's lots of them as with a company that's scaling, but anything specific that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think that change is always a challenge. I definitely embrace change, but it's kind of communicating that with the team and being transparent around when things are changing, or for example, when we kind of merged core IT with kind of business systems, we definitely, there was just some process change, and as we get bigger, it's going to seem like there's a lot more red tape, and how we get things approved. I always talk about Coupa being one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah.
Coupa is our PO system. It used to go from me being the only approver to actually having 10 approvers, and so adapting, I think is really key, and being able to communicate the long-term goals with the team.
Very cool. I think we have time for one last question, and I'm actually going to merge two questions that we've got into one. How do you help your team maximize output, and how do you prioritize for yourself and your team? It's all about the manager skills.
Yeah. So maximizing output, really understanding, again, building that roadmap that is focused on, aligning with, your business goals, but as well as your stakeholders. And the third leg of that would be, keeping the lights on. And so balancing, those, well, we have to do these and we want to do these, and prioritizing. It's not easy. And getting input from not only the stakeholders, but also just talking to the team. I think sometimes that roadmaps are kind of built for teams and not collaborated with. And sometimes there's just things that I just don't have all the answers for. And involving the team has been really helpful. And then as far as, what was the second part of that one?
With all that, how do you prioritize? So this is how you maximize the output. How do you prioritize things?
Yeah. So for prioritizing, you have your day-to-day, tactical, fires. I think it's being able to be that decision maker for your team. Sometimes people will come up to me and say, hey, this just happened, so this means that this project is going to get delayed. Sometimes I just want that affirmation that, okay, it's okay. You're not going to get in trouble. It's not going to go on your review. Things happen, and we just have to roll with the punches. And so being that kind of cheerleader for your team, and sometimes that's just saying, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
We also just implemented, or just hired, I should say, a portfolio manager for IT, and she has been tremendous in kind of helping streamline that intake. So requests kind of go through her, and she can kind of, she knows the what's on the roadmap, and she knows the workload, and she can kind of say, okay, this is going your way, and it's just kind of that first line of defense that's just super helpful.
Yeah. Branding, communication, and portfolio management. That's awesome. Yeah. You don't hear that often.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're almost out of time. So first of all, Dana, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's been incredibly helpful. What we'll do is sort of package all of these questions, package the video, and shoot it out to everyone so that they have it as well. And for everyone who's on the line, thank you so much for joining. We hope to do many more of these in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. This has been super fun.